The sandwich is practically an American institution. It is a basic essential for lunch boxes, parties, and picnics.
Before the accessible and flavorful sandwich trends are the survival sandwiches our grandparents had to eat just to get by the day. This meant being creative with whatever was on hand or in their humble food pantries. They didn't have the luxury of choice. They just ate what was cheap, filling, and this time, one might think of a strange combination with bread. Here are 20 forgotten poor man sandwiches that tell stories of tough times and kept families going when money was tight. Ready for a bite? 20. The humble lard sandwich. Back in the day, when times were tough and wallets were thin, the lard sandwich was the go-to meal for a lot of folks, especially grandparents who lived through war, poverty, or just plain hard times. It's as simple as it sounds. A slice of bread with a smear of lard, maybe a pinch of salt if you were lucky, or sugar if you wanted to pretend it was a treat. No fancy ingredients, no frills, just something to fill the belly and get through the day. It's the kind of sandwich that makes people today raise an eyebrow, but for our grandparents, it was survival. There wasn't always money for meat, cheese, or even butter. Lard was cheap, and it kept well. It had calories, fat, and gave just enough energy to keep going. And somehow, despite its simplicity, it stuck around in the memories of those who ate it. Not necessarily because it tasted amazing, but because it reminded them of where they came from and what they made it through. Some might laugh or cringe at the idea now, but the lard sandwich tells a real story. It's not about gourmet flavors or Instagram-worthy food. It's about resilience, about scraping by with what little you had, about grandmothers making do and grandfathers remembering the taste decades later, not with disgust, but with a strange kind of fondness. It was poor food, yes, but it was also honest food. And in its own greasy way, it fed a generation that knew how to survive when things were at their hardest. 19. Potted meat sandwich. One of those old-time staples was the potted meat sandwich. It wasn't fancy, and it definitely wasn't something you'd see on a restaurant menu, but it was cheap, easy, and filled bellies when there wasn't much else around. Potted meat came in little cans, stuff like Underwood or similar off-brands. It was a mystery meat blend, usually made from various parts of pork or beef, mashed into a soft, salty spread. It wasn't exactly elaborate, but it had protein, a long shelf life, and it didn't require any cooking. That was a big deal back then. Folks could slap it on a slice of white bread, maybe top it with pickles or mustard if they had some, and call it lunch. A lot of the time, it was just plain, bread and meat paste, nothing more. For many families, this kind of sandwich was a regular meal, especially during the Great Depression or hard times in rural America. Refrigeration was a luxury, and canned goods were lifesavers. It was about survival, not taste. People didn't complain. They were grateful just to eat. Some even grew to like the stuff. That salty, rich flavor stuck with them over the years, and for some older folks today, opening a can of potted meat brings back strong memories, not just of struggle, but of resilience. Back then, it meant the difference between going hungry and getting by. That humble sandwich was a symbol of making do with what you had. It reminds us how tough our grandparents were, how they found ways to feed families with almost nothing, and how something as simple as a sandwich could carry a lot of weight. The next one are for fans of the iconic ketchup and everything it goes with. 18. Ketchup sandwich. Just 2 slices of soft white bread, usually the cheapest kind from the corner store, and a generous squirt of ketchup spread between them. That's it. No meat, no cheese, no vegetables. It wasn't made to impress anyone. It was made because there was nothing else. For a lot of grandparents, this wasn't a quirky snack. It was lunch, sometimes even dinner. It was the only thing standing between hunger and a growling stomach. To people today, it might sound like a joke, a meme, something you'd make on a dare. But back then, it was survival food. If you were lucky, the bread wasn't stale, and the ketchup hadn't been watered down in the bottle to make it stretch. There wasn't much choice. When payday was still a few days away, and the pantry looked like a ghost town, a ketchup sandwich was the solution. It filled the belly just enough to keep moving. And in a weird way, it kind of worked. Ketchup is one of those strange foods that pretends to be more than it is. It's sweet, tangy, salty. It has flavor, which was more than could be said for plain bread. Spread it thin, and you had a sandwich. Spread it thick, and you could almost convince yourself you were eating something special. Some kids tried to toast the bread to make it fancy. Others added a shake of pepper or whatever seasoning they could sneak from the spice cabinet. It was creative desperation, and it stuck. Funny thing is, a lot of older folks still talk about ketchup sandwiches with a kind of twisted fondness. Not because they were delicious, most would be the first to say they weren't, but because they represented a time when people knew how to get by, when you didn't waste food, when you didn't complain, even if dinner was just bread and ketchup. You ate it, said thank you, and hoped tomorrow's meal might come with a slice of bologna or a bit of butter. There's a kind of honor in meals like that. They're humble, honest, and full of history. Behind every ketchup sandwich is a story of a family doing the best they could, of kids scraping plates clean, of mothers and fathers making ends meet without letting their children know just how bad things really were. Today, most people wouldn't dream of eating one unless it was for nostalgia's sake. And even then, they'd probably doctor it up with artisan bread and organic ketchup and call it something ironic. But for the generation that grew up on them, the ketchup sandwich was real life. It was childhood. It was hard times, and getting through them. And, in its own weird way, it was enough. 17. Mayonnaise sandwich. Let's be honest, a mayonnaise sandwich doesn't sound all that appealing. It's just bread with mayo slapped between it, maybe a little black pepper if someone's feeling fancy. No meat, no cheese, not even a slice of lettuce to trick you into thinking it's something more. It's the bare minimum of what you can call a sandwich. But for a lot of people, especially our grandparents or great-grandparents, it was a lifeline. Sometimes all you had was a loaf of bread and a jar of mayonnaise. No one ate it because they wanted to. They ate it because they had to. It's what people call a struggle meal. Cheap, filling, and just enough to keep you going. Maybe it sounds sad now, but for the people who grew up on it, it was part of life. It was survival in sandwich form. We live in a time where even a simple sandwich might have 5 different ingredients and a fancy name. But the mayonnaise sandwich is a reminder of harder times, of resilience. It's a poor man's meal, sure, but it's also a symbol of getting by with little, of making something out of nothing. Grandparents who grew up on those sandwiches didn't have much, but they made it through. And maybe that plain, pale sandwich helped them do it. 16. Cheese and apple sandwich. A cheese and apple sandwich might sound a little strange if you've never had one. Just slices of cheddar and apple between 2 pieces of bread. No fancy sauces, no grilled panini press, nothing toasted. But for a lot of grandparents back in the day, that simple combo was more than just lunch. It was survival. When money was tight, people had to get creative. You couldn't always afford meat, and even butter was a luxury some weeks. But if you had a block of cheese, a few apples from the backyard tree or local market, and some bread, you had a meal. Cheddar gave you something salty and sharp. The apple added a bit of sweetness and crunch, and the bread held it all together. It's easy to forget that our grandparents didn't grow up with snack packs and pre-sliced deli meat. They ate what they had, And sometimes that meant putting two mismatched things together and hoping it worked. And you know what? Cheese and apple actually does work. It's the kind of sandwich that doesn't pretend to be more than it is, but still surprises you. It's humble, weirdly tasty, and full of history. 15. Egg sandwich. The egg sandwich is about as straightforward as it gets. A hard-boiled or fried egg, a sprinkle of salt and pepper, and 2 slices of bread. Maybe toasted if you're lucky, maybe not. No bacon, no mayo, no avocado. Just the basics. And for a lot of grandparents growing up in tough times, that was more than enough. Eggs were a go-to back then because they were cheap, full of protein, and easy to make. If your family had a few hens out back or could afford a carton from the store, you were set for a few meals. Toss an egg between bread and boom, you had breakfast, lunch, or dinner, depending on the day. It wasn't glamorous, but it filled your stomach, and that was the main goal. Survival first, flavor second. For many, the egg sandwich brings back memories of wartime rationing, factory work, or long school days with an old lunch tin. You didn't complain because you knew others had even less. And honestly, when that warm fried egg was pressed between 2 slices of fresh bread, it tasted pretty good. It reminded you that you were cared for, even if there wasn't much in the fridge. While the world's moved on to expensive brunches and runny yolks on brioche buns, there's still something comforting about the original. The poor man's egg sandwich, basic, honest, and proud of it. 14. Sardine sandwich. Now here's a sandwich that really separates the generations, the sardine sandwich. Just canned sardines, sometimes mashed up with a little mustard or laid out with a few slices of onion slapped onto bread. That's it. No lettuce, no tomato, no apology. It smells like something that should be eaten outdoors, but to a lot of grandparents, this was a go-to meal when money was tight and the fridge was nearly empty. Sardines were cheap, came in a can, and didn't go bad anytime soon. That made them perfect for tough times. Plus, they were packed with protein and healthy fats. Though no one back then cared about omega-3s, they just cared about not going hungry. Add mustard if you had it to cut through the fishiness, or onion if you needed a little kick. Either way, it was a sandwich that didn't ask for much and didn't pretend to be anything fancy. For a lot of older folks, this sandwich was tied to hard work and long days. Factory jobs, farming, construction, places where you didn't have time or money for a big lunch. You ate fast, you ate cheap, and you got back to work. The sardine sandwich wasn't about taste, it was about toughness. And while younger generations might wrinkle their noses at the smell, for those who grew up on it, that smell means resilience. Sure, it's not winning any popularity contests today, but there's something kind of beautiful about a sandwich like that. Honest, stubborn, and unpretentious, just like the people who ate it. Plain fruit in a sandwich? Why not? The next combination might be your grandparents' favorite. 13. Banana sandwich. The banana sandwich is one of those weird meals that actually makes sense once you've lived through hard times. Take a banana, slice it up, spread some peanut butter or mayo, depending on the family, and sandwich it between 2 pieces of bread. That's it. Sweet, soft, and just strange enough to make you pause. Until you realize this was survival food for a lot of grandparents. Bananas were cheap, especially when they started to go brown, and stores were trying to get rid of them. Peanut butter was a pantry staple that stuck to your ribs. And mayonnaise? Well, that one's more controversial. But back then, you used what you had. It might sound odd now, but if mayo was all that was in the fridge, then that's what went on the sandwich. No shame in it, just doing what needed to be done. This sandwich was especially common in households with kids. It was quick, soft, and just sweet enough to feel like a treat. even though it was made from the bare minimum. No one eating a banana sandwich was trying to impress anyone. They were just trying to get by. And somehow, that soft banana with the salty peanut butter or tangy mayo turned into a kind of comfort food, one that sticks in your memory long after you've moved on to fancier meals. When someone tells you their grandma used to eat banana and mayo sandwiches, don't laugh. That combo kept a lot of people full during the lean years. 12. Sugar sandwich. The sugar sandwich might sound like a kid's guilty pleasure, but for many grandparents, it was a serious meal during tough times. It's just bread, sometimes buttered or spread with margarine, and sprinkled with white or brown sugar. No fancy spreads, no jams, no honey, just plain bread and sugar. Simple, cheap, and oddly comforting. Even just a sprinkle on buttered bread could turn plain carbs into something sweet and satisfying. It wasn't fancy filling like a sandwich with meat or cheese, but it was quick, easy, and affordable. When you couldn't afford to waste anything, a sugar sandwich stretched a few crumbs into a small treat that helped keep hunger at bay. This sandwich wasn't about nutrition, exactly. It was about making do. It was a little spark of joy in otherwise hard days, especially for kids who got handed these simple sandwiches when the cupboards were bare. The crunch of the sugar against the soft bread was a small bit of sweetness in a world that wasn't always kind. 11. Oatmeal sandwich. The oatmeal sandwich isn't something you see on menus or get excited about at a deli. It's basically leftover cooked oats, spread cold and sticky between two slices of bread. Not exactly a crowd pleaser, right? But for many grandparents, this humble sandwich was a way to avoid wasting food and stretch out every last bite during hard times. Back then, nothing went to waste. If there were leftover oats from breakfast, you didn't just throw them out. You slapped them between bread and called it lunch. It wasn't about taste or presentation. It was about making sure every crumb counted when money was tight and the cupboards were bare. The texture might have been a little weird and the oats a bit cold and clumpy, but it filled you up and saved the day. This sandwich might seem strange or even a bit gross to today's taste buds, but it's a powerful reminder of how people made do. No fancy spreads, no fresh ingredients, just plain oats and bread. But it was enough. Enough to keep hunger away and keep going through long days of work and worry. 10. Molasses sandwich. The molasses sandwich might sound strange to most people today. Just a smear of thick, dark molasses on bread, sometimes with a bit of butter, or even lard if you had it. No fancy spreads or trendy ingredients, just something sticky and sweet to get through the day. But for a lot of grandparents, this was a go-to when food was scarce and money was tight. Molasses was cheap and packed a punch of sweetness, which made it a lifesaver in tough times. Butter or lard added a bit of fat and richness, making the sandwich more filling and easier to get down. It wasn't a gourmet treat, but it hit the spot, especially when hunger was gnawing and there wasn't much else to eat. This sandwich carries a lot of history. It's a taste of a time when people made do with whatever they could get, when sugar was expensive, but molasses was a more affordable alternative. And while the sticky sweetness might seem odd to modern palates, it was a small comfort, a little bit of joy amid struggle. 9. Fried bologna sandwich. The fried bologna sandwich is one of those classic survival meals that lots of grandparents know well. Just a slice of bologna fried up until it's crispy around the edges, slapped onto plain bread, maybe with a little mustard if you were lucky. It's not fancy, it's not sophisticated, but it's satisfying, and sometimes that was all that mattered. Back in the day, bologna was affordable and lasted a while in the fridge. Frying it up gave it a little extra flavor and texture, turning a simple lunch into something a bit more exciting. When money was tight and options were limited, the fried bologna sandwich was a quick, cheap way to fill your stomach without breaking the bank. For many, this sandwich brings back memories of childhood lunches and hard-working parents doing their best to stretch every dollar. It's a reminder that good food doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes it's just about making the most of what you've got. The crispy edges, the salty meat, the soft bread. Together, they make a humble but hearty sandwich that kept families going. 8. Peanut butter and onion sandwich. At first, the idea of a peanut butter and onion sandwich sounds downright weird. Peanut butter? Sweet and creamy. Onion? Sharp and biting. Put those two together on bread? It's not exactly a combo you see on menus these days, but for many grandparents, this sandwich was a real, honest-to-goodness meal. Something they ate when times were tough and options were limited. Back then, peanut butter was cheap and filling, and onions were one of the few fresh veggies you could often find around the house or garden. People had to get creative to avoid wasting food and to make every bite count. The sharpness of the onion actually cut through the richness of the peanut butter, making a strangely balanced bite. It wasn't that mouth-watering, but it was enough to keep hunger away when money was tight. It might sound gross to some, but this sandwich tells a story about resilience and making do. When you're working with what you have, you mix the unusual with the familiar and hope for the best. So, while the combo sounds strange now, it's actually a testament to resourcefulness and a little bit of old-school courage in the kitchen. Who knew peanut butter and onion could be a survival sandwich? I guess you've never heard about the next forgotten poor man's sandwich in the list. Do you have a guess? 7. Cold bean sandwich. The cold bean sandwich isn't exactly what you'd call a delicacy. It's leftover baked beans or pintos, mashed up and spread between two slices of plain bread. No fancy fixings, no fresh toppings, just beans and bread, sometimes a little sauce from the beans' juice, making things sticky. It might sound a little messy or even strange, but for many grandparents, this sandwich was a practical, no-nonsense meal during hard times. Beans have always been a cheap, reliable source of protein and fiber. When you had leftovers from dinner, wasting them wasn't an option. So instead of tossing the beans, you mashed them up and made a sandwich out of them. It wasn't pretty, but it was filling. And when you're hungry and money's tight, that's what counts. Eating a cold bean sandwich might not win any fans today, but it tells a story about how people stretched every meal and refused to waste a crumb. It's a reminder of the resourcefulness that got families through lean days and how sometimes survival food doesn't look or sound appetizing, but it works. 6. Liverwurst sandwich. Bold flavor, simple fuel. The Liverwurst sandwich isn't for everyone. It's basically slices of liver sausage, rich, soft, and a little bit funky, laid on bread, often with a bit of onion and mustard to cut through the heaviness. It's not fancy, and it's definitely not subtle. But for many grandparents, this sandwich was a reliable, affordable meal when money was tight and options were limited. Liverwurst was a cheap source of protein and calories, and it kept well without refrigeration for a good while, making it perfect for hard times. Adding onion and mustard wasn't just for flavor. It helped balance the richness and gave the sandwich a little kick. It wasn't a sandwich you'd brag about, but it filled you up and kept you going. This sandwich carries the smell and taste of a different era, one where making do was the name of the game. It reminds us how people learned to appreciate foods that might seem strange or strong to modern tastes. 5. Bread and gravy sandwich. The bread and gravy sandwich isn't exactly what you'd call a fancy meal. It's just plain bread soaked or slathered with leftover gravy, usually from a roast or some kind of stew. No meat, no sides, just bread and gravy. It sounds messy and maybe a little sad, but for many grandparents, this sandwich was a quick, filling way to make something out of almost nothing. If there was leftover gravy, you used every drop. Pouring it over bread was a way to stretch a meal and keep hunger at bay without spending extra money. The bread soaked up all that rich, flavorful gravy, turning simple carbs into a surprisingly satisfying snack, or even a meal. 4. Onion sandwich. The onion sandwich might sound pretty basic, or even a little harsh, but for many grandparents, it was a quick, cheap way to fill up when money was tight. Just raw slices of onion tucked between bread, spread with butter or mayo. No extras, no frills, just honest, simple ingredients. Onions were a staple in many households because they lasted a long time and added flavor to otherwise plain meals. When times were tough, peeling a few onion slices and putting them on buttered bread was a way to add some bite and bulk to a meal without spending much. It's not a sandwich for the faint of heart. Those raw onions pack a punch. But it was real food that kept hunger at bay. For a lot of people, the onion sandwich was part of childhood lunches, or a quick snack after a long day. The sharpness of the onion against the soft bread was oddly satisfying once you got used to it. 3. Butter sandwich. No preserved spreads and meats or cheeses, just bread and butter. It might sound boring or even sad by today's standards, but for many grandparents growing up during tough times, this simple sandwich was a quick, affordable way to stave off hunger and keep going. Butter added richness, fat, and flavor to what would otherwise be plain, dry bread. When money was tight and cupboards were nearly bare, butter on bread wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity. It was filling enough to tide you over until the next meal, and comforting enough to bring a little pleasure to an otherwise difficult day. For some, the butter sandwich was a regular snack, a way to stretch a small amount of butter to feed hungry mouths. This humble sandwich also reminds us how much times have changed. Today, we often expect complex flavors, endless toppings, and fancy bread varieties. But back then, simplicity was survival. The butter sandwich wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about using what you had and making it count. And sometimes, that's exactly what people needed, something plain, honest, and satisfying. 2. Cucumber sandwich. The cucumber sandwich might bring to mind fancy afternoon teas and delicate finger foods, but for many grandparents, it was a simple, refreshing meal made with what was on hand. Thin slices of cucumber, a sprinkle of salt, and sometimes a splash of vinegar, pressed between plain bread, made for a light and cooling sandwich that was easy to prepare and gentle on the wallet. Cucumbers were often grown in backyard gardens or bought cheaply at the market, making them accessible even when money was tight. Their fresh crunch and mild flavor added a little brightness to otherwise plain meals. Adding a bit of salt and vinegar helped bring out the taste, making the sandwich more flavorful without needing expensive ingredients. This sandwich wasn't about indulgence. It was about finding small moments of freshness in hard times. It was a way to enjoy something cool and simple, especially during hot weather or when the pantry was running low on supplies. For many grandparents, the cucumber sandwich was a reminder that you didn't need much to make a meal. A few humble ingredients could go a long way. 1. Crisco sandwich. The Crisco sandwich might sound odd or even a little gross to modern ears. Just plain bread spread thick with Crisco shortening, sometimes sweetened with a sprinkle of sugar or a dollop of jam. No butter, no fancy spreads, just Crisco. But for many grandparents growing up in tough times, this sandwich was a cheap, filling way to get through the day. Crisco was affordable and lasted a long time without spoiling, making it a pantry staple when fresh butter was too expensive or unavailable. The shortening added a rich, greasy layer that helped fill hungry stomachs. When money was tight, a Crisco sandwich was better than going hungry. Adding sugar or jam gave it a bit of sweetness, turning a plain mouthful into something a little more comforting. These sandwiches remind us how people face tough days head-on, using even the simplest ingredients to keep going. Sometimes, survival food doesn't look pretty, but it carries a powerful story of resilience. Are you about to make your own nostalgic comfort sandwich? Thanks for watching the video, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.